Dr. Shane. I am uber excited about day number 4. Day number 4, we are going to be looking at, closing the gap, closing the communication gap in your marriage. I thank you all for returning. We will dive right in. 1 second. Let me go here to our slides. And we are on day number 4. Day number 4, we're going to start by looking at your homework for last time. Your homework for day 3 was to look at what types of problems you two face, And those were the type 1, 2, and 3 problems. Everyone talked about them in the browser. I just asked that you compare with your spouse and see if you define them the same. You may be shocked to see that you describe the same incident differently. Like things you see as type 2, they may seem as type 3 or vice versa. Seldom will you see a 1 as a type 2 or 3. But anyways, just touch base, see where you're together, where you're not together. The next thing I want you to do is say, what are your different perspectives? What are your perpetual differences? We really have to get clarity on our perpetual differences so we can start cutting a deal rather than them going down to type 3 problems. The next thing is, how does quid pro quo impact your relationship? And I'm going to say this, we hear a lot better once we've been heard, once we feel we've been heard. The reason is we're de-escalated. We are de-escalated, and the blood goes from back here in the reptile brain to the frontal lobe. Reptile brain, fight or flight, can't take in new information. We either have to flee or go on the attack or defense because we feel we are being attacked. So it's real important to understand how all of that stuff impacts us, because it is major. When we talk about getting on the same page, a lot of times things other than what we're communicating stop us from getting on the same page. And that's why I've come to learn that couples really, in an amazing way, in an amazing way, aren't fighting about the facts, but what they feel the fact teller is saying. Anyways, so we want you to look at that. The next thing we want you to look at is really what I just said, why you and your spouse can't get on the same page. I want you to accept that it probably has little to do with the facts and more to do with how you feel about the fact teller. So what does being heard look like? And I know you say, being heard, how could it look any kind of way? Well, there's a roadmap to being heard, and we are going to talk about it. So I ask people all the time, what is communication? They say, well, they need to hear me. And if we'll fix their hearing, we'll be okay. I'm okay. Basically, that's saying they're not okay. If we fix them, we fix us, because the problem is all with them. That's what people say when they come into my practice, and they're pretty hurt. And they think, I've not done nothing. It's all you. And so that's, I guess, the stage of communication that I start out with. But a lot of times, the more sophisticated people say communication is a two-way street. And I say, well, what do you mean by that? And they'll say, well, it's kind of simple. I hear them, they hear me. I say what I say, and I listen to them. So I believe A, spouse believes B. I can't hear B because A is so important to me. So I want to spend quality time with you. You want more sex. I'm like, you don't want to spend time with me. You don't even like me. Right? So no, that's not going to work. Or I believe, yeah, let's have more sex. You believe in quality time. You can't hear that, boy, I really have legitimate sexual needs. I really have legitimate sexual needs. And because of that, A being so important, you just can't hear it and we miscommunicate it. But it's a two-way street. We both are talking, we're trying to listen to each other. We just can't figure out why can't we hear each other? Why can't we hear each other? Anyone know that this happens to them and they've seen this kind of communication pattern, this kind of communication pattern. So it happens to the best of us. I really ask couples, so there's something else that happens, and that's our ability to process what is being said. That's our ability to process what is being said. So, what do I mean? Actually, communication is four-way. There's what they think, and there's a gap between that and what they say. There's how they say it. You know, do they say it in your face? Do they say it with a lot of anger? Do they say it with, that's funny. You'd mentioned that. So, how they say it, what words do they use? What's their posture when they talk to you? I really do everything well. You, on the other hand, not so much. Not so much. Then there's what you hear. Boy, how does it feel for someone to say not so much? What do you mean? I'm not okay, but you're okay. What do you mean saying it that loud to me? You're angry. I have a problem with people being angry at me. It really affects me. You need to bring your tone down. So we don't hear the message no more. We don't hear the basic message of I love you and I care about you. All these other things interfere. So there's a gap between that, which is what we interpret. What we interpret. So all of these four stops along the way, there are gaps. And we have to accept it isn't as simple as what they said and what we heard. There's a lot other variables, we could call them nonverbal communications, that impact us. And that's what happens with couples and communication. So, what are the barriers to closing that gap? What are the barriers to closing that gap? So, I'm going to go over a huge barrier. There are several. There's obviously tone. There is obviously, boy, we got to find some way to acknowledge something that they said. I talked about this in one of the earlier sessions. We have to find a way to acknowledge what they said. One second. And if we can't acknowledge what they said, we got a problem. Hey, I see Renee is here. How you doing, Renee? I see Tracy is here. I want you all just to, I've talked about a bit here. I talked about the four-way communication process. I talked about the one-way communication process and the two-way communication process and closing the gap. Any thoughts on that from any of you that are here? Hi, this is your first. Hey, Trace, this is my home girl. Everyone loved her on the yard. Anyway, she's an amazing woman and attorney, just nice. One of my favorite people, I'll be honest with you. So I want us to stop and listen and ask ourselves when we think about the four-way communication process. I got it right here, right? Everyone thinks, communication, you need to listen. That's one way. Communication, we need to hear each other. Two-way. But four-way is what really happens, and that's where the gap really takes place. And that, Renee says, that is our problem. That is most couples' problems. I'll be honest with you. Most couples struggle with that problem right there, whereas they can't figure out, so it's interesting. I tell you guys this. I talk about nonverbal communication. Years ago, I had this couple come in, and I have this kind of golden rule. Like the last 10 minutes, 15 maybe, if I get a call, I'll stop and I won't answer it, but I'll say, text me. And they can text me because I live off the freeway, and sometimes people are riding around the freeway. They don't know what exit. They're panicked. Or I'm on the 7th floor and they're in the lobby. So I was texting. And it was very interesting because I just heard this, don't holler at me. I was like, I don't think they hollered at you. So I look up, right? And I said, what do you mean holler at you? And they said, well, they always do it. And I said, ma'am, did you holler? I'm like, I know I'm not crazy. She said, no, I didn't holler. So I said, so you heard her holler? I absolutely did. How many times does that happen? And you think they're gaslighting you. They may not be. So I said, sir, what happened before he hollered? And she says, well, it's really, she did what she always does. I said, well, what'd she do? He said, this right eyebrow here curled up. I said, curled up, what do you mean? He said, look, man, my wife is a Scorpio, and you could ask her siblings. They say when that thing curls up, it's over. It is over. We are in a fight. And so she didn't say stop. She didn't holler at him. That curled up, she didn't have to. So I'm saying we think we're listening to the facts and how we feel about the facts. Not at all. How we feel about the fact tellers. And I could give you countless examples of this. But tell me your experience with that. Be honest. How many times have you talked to your spouse and it's like we had two different conversations? Conversations A and conversation B. I tell you, I've had that happen over and over and over again. And it will leave you feeling like you are absolutely crazy or they're just a liar. It says laugh out loud. I'm a Scorpio. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to step on no toes there. But all the time it happens, right? And we think we got a communication problem of the traditional sense. No, they're just, communication is a more complex thing. It's not a simple variable. It's not what you said. Couples do not fight about the facts. Most times they want to do the same thing. They want to do what's best for their family. The problem is in trying to do what's best for their family, they identify the threat differently. They identify what needs to be done to deal with that threat or that problem or that challenge based on their skill set and their strengths, not yours. But more times than not, they're trying to fix the problem. They are trying to fix the problem. I talked to you about the couple earlier where one had the goal of saving 10%, the other had the goal of saving 20 to become World War II. And one was calling the other cheap. One was saying all you want to do is spend everything and you need to grow up. You need to grow up and be a real adult here, right? Real turn on. Anyways, in reality, both of them wanted to do what was best for their family. One wanted them to retire, pay for their kids' college. The other, which is kind of like they wanted the destination, the goal of retirement. The other wanted to enjoy the ride. We ain't going to be here. We don't invest in this marriage of ours. It won't have any value. And we will be divorced. So they both were trying to fix a challenge. So I say to you all, just recognize, just because we see the problem and the solution differently does not necessarily mean your spouse doesn't care. Generally, they do care. They just see it differently. So that's what happens in the four-way communication problem, our process. And we are going to talk about one of the ways that there's a gap between what was thought and what was said, because we say according to our communication style, what was heard. What was heard? Well, basically, how was it said? And then what was heard? And from what was heard was how it was interpreted. So one of the big examples and barriers to communication and closing the gap is what we call processing style. And I talked about it a bit in the intro, but I'm going to go back to it and I'm going to have us talk about it. So, all right, you guys, remember this slide. There are three types of communicators. There are non-processors, MPs, processors, and metaprocessors. So non-processors, processors, and metaprocessors. So we're going to talk about these three different types. So non-processors are the type of people that, and if you're on the browser and you're not seeing, just type your name in and you'll come up. Non-processors are the type of people that don't really, or spouses, I shouldn't say people. They're not inanimate objects. They're your spouse. They're people you love. That's your person. They don't really talk about their feelings. They bottle them up. Maybe they get talked over, feel, boy, I can't hang with you verbally. You just talk over me. You don't give me a chance. And I say that because that's real talk. Because if you've gone from them talking to them not talking, there's some reason. It doesn't mean it's your fault. It could be they're somewhere holding a grudge. But we have to figure that out. But if they were always a non-processor, Renee knows that she's a meta processor. She looked at it. So we're going to come back to you on that, Renee. So they either were taught, boy, I can show you better than I can tell you. Maybe they were taught people as a kid, you're to be seen, not heard. Uh, Maybe no one believed them. Maybe they're just born secretive. But they're just not going to talk about their feelings. They probably never talked about their feelings. I will venture to say they never did. And you had to muster out "I love you" and all those other things along the way, and it was mysterious while we were dating, maybe even a challenge. But now we're together, and it's every day I need you to talk. So they're non-processors. Processors are going to talk about their feelings, but talk about them once. And if you are married to a processor, you've probably heard things like, "You keep living in the past," or "We've already talked about that. We've discussed it. Why do we need to go over it?" The third is a meta processor, and that is what Renee said she is. Meta processors not only talk about their feelings, but they talk about the feelings about their feelings. They talk about the feelings about their feelings too. And so if you are a meta processor, you know it. I ask you to go to the browser and type in what type of processor are you? And what type of processor is your spouse? He is a processor. So Renee, that could work with a lot less frustration than if he were a non-processor. I ask you, how do you deal with the fact that once he said it, he said it? Because that has to be a great deal, cause you a great deal of consternation, a great sense of, whoo, boy. Whoo, boy, I want to pull my hair out, strain by strain, hair by hair, and I got a lot of hair, right? It's frustrating. It's frustrating, but shocker, they're likely equally frustrated. They're like, man, but only when he's ready. And that's a trait too, but they'll talk. And I'm saying the non-processor won't even talk. There is no getting ready. So one of the things I want to say to you is that they have a challenge too. Their challenge is they're not wired to have the bandwidth for that. It's just overwhelming. It's too much. So what do I mean by that, right? What I mean by that is some things in life, we really need to get all the pieces to the puzzle together. Like if I have an architect, I want them to really process with everybody on the team every detail. Some things in life, we just need to get the facts and take action and know we'll adjust. So let's say I got people in my military. Hey, that's the plan. We're sticking to it. Bam, we're going to execute. We don't have time to go over and over because the threat will have encroached our enemy walls and we'll be vulnerable and they'll have us, right? And then you got non-processors. Who knows? Maybe they're the stealth. I'm just running with this at this moment. But, you know, how they feel about it doesn't matter. I've been told, boy, bam, got to pop them. How I feel, no one cares about how I feel. I say that to say that there are purposes in life for everything, and we are wired the way we are wired for a particular reason. I hope that helps you, Renee. So what type of processor are you, and what type of processor is your spouse? I want you to really get clarity on that. I want you to get clarity, and this is from Dr. Gottman's research as well. I really want you to get clarity. You know, there's something I didn't say earlier. This is not psychotherapy. It's not a substitute for psychotherapy. So when I ask you to think of a recent fight and some of the questions, I'm not going into therapy with you. This is psychoeducation. If you feel you need to talk to someone who's a therapist, talk to them. Get a licensed therapist in your state and you'll be fine. Anyways, this is not that, but this is a way to figure out how do I start identifying some of the challenges by getting more of an education about it. I hope that's clear. So, ask who your spouse is, figure out who you are. So Renee says, I want to solve the problem. How now he wants to solve it later. Maybe. And that's an important thing. So it's interesting because couples talk about this a lot. So some people need time and distance. Some people want to resolve the conflict and resolve it thoroughly. My thinking on it is this. If you tell me you want to resolve a problem now and I need to think about it, are you going to hold me accountable for my answer. Because if I don't want to talk about it, I've been trying to go to the other room. You follow me in the other room. You follow me down to the basement. By the time I give you my answer, I'm fairly frustrated. I'm extremely frustrated, actually. Probably not the best time because you're going to get my unfiltered answer. You're going to get an answer I haven't thought about. I say give that person time, distance, and space. You probably say, well, they're not going to come back to it. You're not going to get a real answer anyways. You're going to get an explosive reaction that you're going to say is their answer, and they're never going to be able to take it back. And if there's a history of that, we get frustrated pretty quickly. So I'm not saying don't get an answer. I'm just saying let's just agree on a timeline. Hey, is it 24? Is it 48? Is it 72 hours? That would depend. And with a non-processor, you might not get it. But to me, if you press me for an answer, don't hold me accountable for how it comes out. Don't then say, but you said, and hold that without any context because you do a disservice. I was just frustrated and blurted something out to shut you up. Anyways, I'm just saying spouses do that all the time. So, how will understanding each other's processing style impact our ability to close the gap? How will it impact our ability to close the gap? I say in an extremely important way. Thank you for getting that. I say in an extremely important way. What I mean is this. If I understand you're going to talk about it once, I don't need to ask you and I'm not ready to really hear you. And this is kind of what we were just talking about with Renee. If I'm not ready to really hear your answer and you are a processor, you're not getting a better version of that. There's going to be no come back to it later and let's sit down and have the conversation we want to have. In their mind, we talked about it. Maybe part of the reason you feel like they don't. They got angry, you got angry, the fight stopped, and you think we'll come back to it tomorrow. They're not coming back to it tomorrow. They've said it. And so we have to factor that in. We have to factor into, how we look at each other. So I'll be honest with you. I don't want the non-processors to beat me up, but either they'll see you as needy, which probably is unfair. Sometimes it is. They'll probably be frustrated because they just don't have the bandwidth to do it. And all metaprocessors have friends that are metaprocessors. And so I'm not saying everything in your life can be farmed out. Some things you just need to talk to your person about. Some things we don't. Like you could talk to me about a fact, but after a day listening to folk, I don't care what Oprah Winfrey said. I make myself listen to news about politics because I have so many people that come into my office and I know I'm going to see a lot of people in there. So, Renee, you say I'm needing. What's the difference between that and being needy? So, could be needy, could be they're negligent, but if I only have the bandwidth to say it once and you want to talk about it 10 times, am I really being negligent? Or am I giving you all I got? You can't get blood out of turnip. Does it sound like I'm lowering the bar for them? Absolutely. Am I? No, not at all. I'm not lowering the bar. I'm just accepting reality for what reality is. Anyways, and the reality is you can talk about it once, and let's just make sure we talk about it, not when we're angry, not when we're frustrated, but we are of sound mind and we're able to really have the conversation. So I hope that explains why I was saying, hey, let's just wait and make sure it's the best time. But if you're feeling needy and neglectful based on this personality variable that we talked about last time, a perpetual problem, boy, we might need to get professional help to help us see each other's side. It's so funny. I had a couple like that just the other day. She was high anxiety. And she would talk to him about a problem, and then he would say, what about that dog over there? It looks like his leg is broken. Right in the middle. She's furious. You don't care, da-da-da-da-da. So I talked, and he says, well, I think I got ADHD, and you know what? I do get distracted. So you think that's the problem. She's like, well, what about him realizing he has ADHD? Why doesn't he just change? I said, well, that's half the problem. Remember, at least a two-way street, really a four-way highway. So we came back and we discussed the reality that wasn't all that was going on. What else was going on was simply this. She had anxiety, so she would talk for like 15 minutes and she would mention 80 problems, or I'm exaggerating. She would talk for 10 minutes and probably mention 15 things, 10 to 15 things. And someone with ADHD can't remember 3 things, right? 10 or 15 things ain't ever going to happen in this life. And she's going on and on. I'm like, man, let's just eat the elephant one bite at a time. So there may be some other reasons they're seeing you as needy, is that your style is the opposite of theirs. He didn't have the bandwidth to process all these challenges. So you guys know what I'm talking about. Tell me how this plays out in your life. How this plays out in your life. So anyways, we really have to stop and think, because if I'm saying you're neglectful or needy or you're saying I'm needy, we're not taking any accountability. We're saying the problem is all you. And that's the first model. One way, just fix them and we'll be okay. And it's at least fix both of us. But really, it's accepting the fact that there are a lot of things along the way that stop us from hearing each other, So I want you to read through these questions, and I want you to think about your marriage, and I want you to think about which style represents your communication pattern. Are you over talking them? Are they under talking you? Are you frustrated because yesterday we talked about it, but I've thought about it now in a different way? Are you frustrated because they're a non-processor and they don't run it by you and they just take action? You're like, what do you mean you bought a new car? That is absolutely nuts. And it is. They should get your input. But I want you just to at least accept the fact that it just may not be personal from the standpoint of you're feeling disrespected, like they don't respect you. They may completely respect you. Just may be very, very private. Hey, Felicia. So I just want you to consider that and recognize a lot more goes into it. So that was big. And it was big from the standpoint of what happens when we don't communicate well, what gets in the way, what really causes the interference. I want you to definitely do your homework on this one. I'll scroll back to the homework pages, because what I want you to do is be able to sit down with your spouse and figure this out. A lot of times we figure it out with our friends, and our friends don't really have the answers. Our friends don't know why they only say it once. Our friends don't know why they don't say it at all. Our friends don't know why the other person won't shut up. They just think, oh, they don't respect you. They just talk over you, or they won't talk to you because they don't respect you. See that? If I talk to you, it's a problem. If you don't talk, I say it to say context is everything. And we have to understand who a person is, because our friends don't have that information. They don't have a clue about that information. And they're going off our one-sided story, which isn't a distortion in the deceptive sense of the word, but it's a distortion in that it presents as, here's clarity. Oh, they just don't want to talk to me. Oh, they may not want to be over-talked, and they may find that they're going to be over-talked. And I find that pattern with a lot of couples, that it's like they just don't have the bandwidth to process the other person's information. Your friend isn't going to have that information. I guarantee you that. So I just say all this to say, hey, let's stop. Let's figure out what's really going on. That is what communication or miscommunication looks like. So now we're going to go back to the homework for last night, or for tonight, rather. That's from today's assignment. I want you to ask something other than communication itself. That's, I'm saying A, and you're hearing B. Be forcing us to miscommunicate. And that in the name of styles, that in the name of having these gaps, that in the name of, boy, you know what? Our communication style just doesn't mesh. And I want you to compare that answer with them. You'll probably find this very insightful, especially if they've been watching this tour. You could get them to watch this. I want you to ask, are they really needy? Are they really neglectful? Am I neglectful? Am I needy? Your friends may say no. You may be or not be either of those things, but we got to respect the fact that that's how they're experiencing you. Like if you come and you want to talk about 10 things, most people, 3 things, they're out. First thing, okay, yeah, I get to see what you're saying. Second thing, hold up, we talked about that. I remember it differently. Third thing, okay, this is what we're doing. By the time you get to their 8th thing, they are overwhelmed and you are not having a conversation anymore. You are having a monologue rather than a dialogue. Anyways, just being real with you about it. So I want us to do that. I want us also to try to redo a conversation that we recently had, obviously, a disagreement or talking about a disagreement, and look at these patterns and ask yourself, how would you interpret them differently? And this will be a great dialogue for you too, to sit down and talk about, and how do different styles impact your ability to close the gap. So I thank you all for listening in. Uh, this is it's simple stuff, but it complicates relationships in a big way. So the essence of what we're saying is simple, but the impact can be overwhelming and devastating, especially if we don't address it, because we'll have a lot of resentment because we're thinking, boy, this is just who you are and you just don't care about me, or you do something different. We assume everyone thinks like we do. In reality, people just don't. We hire the same and marry the opposite. Thank you, Renee. I appreciate it. I think we are at the end of, I think we were going to lunch. I did today's session at lunchtime rather than in the evening. Either event, I want you to know 2 things that are very important. And the first one is that divorce rates drop as much as 30% with an intervention. 30% with an intervention. And the next thing, it's never too late to live your happily ever after. Anyways, thanks a lot, you guys. I appreciate you very much. This is day 4. I will see you in day 5. Make it a great day. Thanks.